Phil, it's great that you could join me here today because I've been really keen to have you on because of your extensive experience from, teaching to being a keynote speaker, to being a trainer, to being an author, to your work as an advisor in the sporting sector, which I can't wait to explore a little bit more. But you're the expert on yourself. You all know your career better than anyone. Please, can you give me an introduction into yourself, your career, and what you're doing now?
Oh, God. The last time somebody asked me that question, I refused, and it didn't go down very well. I have now stopped teaching. I taught for nearly 30 years. I write books. I train other teachers. I deliver inspiring, motivational keynote addresses. I have worked within elite level professional football. I do a lot of things, really. I make records that nobody buys.
And out of those things, right, from teacher to trainer to being involved in the sporting sector to being an author, right, is there a particular area which has interested you the most out of your entire career, despite being a teacher for 30 years?
No, I think they all have their own unique enrichments, really. I used to, before the last couple of years, absolutely adore teaching. I loved the ability to turn around lives that many people thought couldn't be turned around. I loved committing to underdogs, but I adore the process of writing, and I love the kind of technical and charisma challenge of trying to write very, very entertaining but equally valuable sessions for teachers, and I get quite an ego buzz out of being in front of a big crowd.
I love that, and I love the way that you talk about unique enrichments, right, and supporting the underdog, and also what you talk about there, that charisma challenge. Now, as someone who's been involved in education for several years and seen it from a first-hand student in terms of then transitioning into alternative education, into going off to do my PGC next week, right? I mean, I've been on a very sort of unique pathway around that where I've sort of gone backwards to go forwards, right? But it's given me a great experience because as I go into the PGC, I'll have more experience than someone who's just completed the degree and gone straight onto the PGC, right? But one thing that I think is lacking, and I think it's the quality of teachers over time, where they've lacked that charisma and connecting with students, that is just slowly missing, where we start to become a bit more systematic and schools start going, well, there's all your set work for the year, you deliver that PowerPoint, all the same teachers are doing it, and it sort of takes away their allowance on that autonomy as they get teaching.
Well, yeah, we're in a period of time where education is viewed mainly through a financial lens, and consequently, the idea when I entered the profession, I was basically chucked in a room and told to get on with it, and as a result, I had to create my own very, very specific style of teaching, which was unique, I suppose, to me. What we have now, and in many ways, perhaps that wasn't the right thing, but what we have now is a very, very highly codified approach to an art form. And it sees everything through the lens of efficiencies. It perceives efficiencies and academic outcomes, by which I mean numbers on certificates, to be vastly more important than experience, to be vastly more important than the child's experience of school. And my contention is that in many environments now, kids are receiving identikit lessons or identikit styles of teaching in every single lesson. I have a nice anecdote about my final school. There was a maths consultant and I both working there, and we were informed by one of the students that we were going to be dispensed with 2 weeks before we actually were. And bless her, she said, we know you and Mr. S are going to get sacked because you don't teach like everybody else. So the kids' experience was that they were having more or less exactly the same experience in every lesson. And I don't know whether that's actually a good thing. I think it's probably quite a bad thing.
And yeah, that's what I agree entirely. Is having been through that myself and seen some great teachers over the years, and the way that they engaged us and the different types of lessons, then the sitting lessons as a teaching assistant, and have that experience behind me and see the same sort of systematic review and have the same sort of identity to lessons, the same format. Then at times, then I feel like the students are not being inspired, they're not engaging with subjects, they're not enjoying it, and therefore that's why their disengagement becomes so early on, and that's why we're seeing a factor of behavior issues, which of course there are those external factors right now in terms of how the economy looks and obviously how people view the government and from the home environment and those several other impacts. But where it comes directly down to the school, then, you know, why does a student become disengaged? Why aren't they inspired? And does that come down to the systematic processes which are put in place?
I would tend to agree with that. Kids are voting with their feet. School itself, and of course, this is not all schools. School itself has become quite a stultifying experience, and we also have this kind of very, very high control element to things. A lot of it goes back to the kind of blanket introduction of the techniques from Teach Like a Champion, which is a very control-orientated text, which refers to children as non-compliers. As to whether there is a behaviour crisis, I tend towards thinking that there isn't. I tend towards thinking that the idea of a behaviour crisis is merely a kind of form of authoritarianism, in that if you identify a crisis, i.e. what Trump is doing, then you can to control over other human beings. Next question.
and you know, I think it's fascinating from, you know, the experience, and as I've seen the behavior firsthand, having worked in a behavior provision and worked in a school, and now looking at what I want to do as a teacher and being in perhaps a different environment, and how I work with those students, and perhaps as I aspire to go into senior leadership, how I'd approach certain situations, and how the experiences which I've just endured have perhaps influenced me and perhaps how I'd approach the situation. Right, you know, it's something that I've been thinking about, and one of the things is, you know, if a student doesn't have great uniform, then we tend to sanction them, put them in isolation for a day, and then they don't have it the next day, and then we just keep that process. So they could be blocked out for 5 or 6 days in isolation. They still don't have the uniform. Therefore, you know, they've lost, you know, 30 hours of learning. So what do you do then at that point? Does the school back down and go, right, we're not going to adhere to our behaviour policy and allow them back into lesson? Or are we going to just continue to, you know, isolate them until they get the right uniform where there's no deadline on it and they continue to miss out on those lessons? Like, where would you go with that if you were a senior leader or advising the senior leader?
Well, I think there's a really important thing in that schools tend to fetishise consistency. And yeah, I personally don't think consistency is a particularly valuable thing. And I know that's contentious in that all authoritarian movements fetishize consistency. And what happens is that consistency and fairness can tend to bash up against each other. And in the event where to be consistent is to be unfair, which is your scenario there, then fairness should win at every point. Obviously, an intelligent response to that would be, well, get the kid the uniform that he needs. Yeah, provide him with the uniform, and then then he won't miss 6 days of learning. It's not intellectually difficult.
Mm. And you know, I've been lucky where the school that I've worked in have had that investment in uniform, where they'd be like, right, here's shoes, here's, you know, the blazer that you need and things like that, right? And so there will still be kids who refuse. I'm not wearing those shoes, they're not mine, someone else wore them yesterday, I'm not wearing a blazer, right? So then the school just goes, okay, right, into the sanction you go, you're refusing what my instruction is. So then it becomes a bit of a play between, as you say, then that control of, right, we've offered you this is what the solution has been, you've still refused it, now you have to have that sanction for refusal. But then we might find ourselves in that situation again tomorrow, where then I've sort of looked at it and gone, okay, right, the shoes are at least our worries. Your attendance, the fact you're here in school is the most important thing. Now, if you're sitting in my classroom, am I going to be looking at your shoes and concerned with that? not in the moment, because I want you to be learning about my subject, and hopefully I can inspire you and I can engage you. And then we can work on those other things where, okay, we need to be punctual, we need to be looking presentable, we need to work on those things over life. Because, you know, if I went for a job interview and I rocked up pair of trainers, jeans, polo shirt, and it's for a teaching job, then it's going to be setting off the wrong example, and I wouldn't have turned up in the right mindset. But there's lots of ways we can work with the young people to support them and try and put that support first compared to teaching. But from your views, is that right to put support over teaching first, or do you put teaching then support?
Well, for teaching, of course. That's what they're there for. But equally, school is kind of partial sticking plaster over the wounds of society. And, of course, children turn up at the school gates in various shades of repair. And we have pastoral duties as well.
Absolutely, I agree. And so when you first started out as a teacher and you took that pathway into the education platform, did you have a plan for how you wanted to spin out? So, for example, being a teacher, going on to be a trainer, being an author, or did these sort of things stem up over the course of your career?
Oh, it was I had no, all I wanted to do was be as good a teacher as I possibly could be. And I had, about 20 years ago, I had a run of ridiculously good luck. Run out a long time ago now. So I won an award, a Pan-London award, then a UK award, then I started writing for The Guardian, then I did a television series which won an award, then I did another television series which won an award, and I started writing books which have never won awards, and I'm bitter about it. So there was no conscious, I'm not a careerist, in truth, never have been. I didn't really have any interest in going into senior management. I've been in 30 years. I've been in one SMT meeting for 10 minutes and I was asked to leave. So I was just interested in being as good a teacher as I could be. I had no career plan.
And when you talk about being the best teacher you could be, what does that look like from your practice? How do you go to be the best teacher so those students are engaged with you, they're loving lessons, they're getting everything that you want to give them from your motivation?
You're asking me to sum up 30 years of professional experience. I had in my last school a comment. There's some year 11 students came in. I rearranged the furniture yet again. And one of the students turned around to another and said, it wouldn't be a Mr. Beadle lesson if the furniture wasn't rearranged. And it just caused me to think, I want lessons to be, like we talk about this consistency and this efficient approach where every single bloody lesson's the same. I wrote recently something that I've not published about what are we doing in class today? What do you think we'll be doing? Is a profoundly more optimistic question than the statement, we know exactly what we're going to be doing is. And so consequently, I think I'd always wanted to construct an environment where the students would not, as they walked in the door, would not be certain as to what's going to happen. Mm. Which is obviously the obverse of how things are now. They know exactly what's going to happen.
Sorry, I'm having trouble connecting.
And I think that's important because you're constructing that important environment whereby, the students aren't expecting that. And therefore, when they're not expecting that, then they're ready to come into the lesson. They're ready to be engaged in different ways. They're not in that systematic review. So that's how that you get them on the edge where they're ready to learn and you get them straight into it rather than, right, okay, there's the same format, right? Write your date, write your classwork, write your objective, then do your starter task. Whereas, right, in we get, right, what did we focus on last week? What was the main word that I used last week? Or what does this word mean? And suddenly, automatically, you got there thinking, you're engaged in that lesson, and then you can start to teach it from there. There's lots of different ways rather than being very systematic. And I think that approach where you're constructing that environment where they're on the unknown as they come in, I think that's exciting. That gives them that exhilaration of going, right, I really enjoy working with this teacher. I have great respect for him. What's the lesson going to look like? Oh, actually, that was nothing what I thought it was going to be. That was a great lesson. Whereas they get that expectation where they go into another lesson, they walk in, same routine, same expectations, same format, same sort of work, right? There's your textbook now, there's your questions at the end of it. And that can be, you get that variation there as a mix, but if it's what you do every week and that's the same format used, then students become disengaged and you wonder why you lose them over that period of time.
Yeah, I think the rise of the cognitive science movement has possibly got a lot to answer for, or rather the misapplication of cognitive science. So what we have in terms of starter activities, which in truth I've never been particularly interested in, just get on with the bloody lesson, teaching stuff. But the cognitive science and the idea of knowledge-rich curriculum, what it's resulted in is starter activities with completely disembodied pieces of knowledge that they're kind of pretty pointless on their own. Like, that's not to say that I don't have established routines. I did do, because I no longer teach, a retrieval activity at the beginning of every lesson, but it would be possibly a bit better thought out than most, in that it would be referencing the previous lesson, or referencing lesson a week ago. Whereas in observing other classes, I have noted that this disembodied facts approach to retrieval is just stultifyingly boring. Also, they tend to just write them all down in the books, and then there's no discussion. Now, I prefer retrieval activities to be discursive. My whole style of teaching has always been dialogic, whereas post the rise of the right wing in the education profession, which is an amazing thing to admit exists, post the rise of the right wing, we are valorizing student silence vastly too much. I don't think, and there are certain voices that really don't know a lot about what they're talking about, but now elevated to very, very high positions that claim that a silent classroom is a good one. Well, not always. Not always. A noisy classroom can be a very, very exciting place to be.
I agree, and I've seen that from a first-hand point of view, being a student myself, and from a university perspective as well. When we're given an allocated task and we're just able to get on, focus on it for half an hour, and then we re-engage, and then we have that opportunity to go and discuss that from a different perspective there. But when we get into looking at these different types of activities, and as you talk about those assessment periods there, I was in one school and we had an assessment period every 2 weeks, and this was this was across the whole curriculum. And so you go into history, bang, there's your assessment, and then later on in the day you might have an English one, then you might have a history. But that was every 2 weeks, so automatically those students, another assessment.
They don't come on that day.
Yeah. But every 2 weeks, and even me going into lesson where I was supporting like an ALN student at the time as a teaching assistant, I was like, oh my god, like again, like when is this going to stop? And I had a discussion with the teacher. What was the purpose behind it? Obviously, they're trying to get as much data as possible. They're trying to make the adjustments as they go on, and that was something they trialed for a year. And I was like, but that's so intensive, though. Even as a TA, I found that intensive to be in, let alone being the student who has to go through that, even at the age of 12 in year 7. And I felt that was just a bit of an overkill, to be honest.
Yeah, I've never really got the total obsession with data. We're absolutely entirely focused on the outcome and the data, and we're forgetting that these people are human beings. And interestingly, in Teach Like a Champion, which I read, by the way, my God, that was a tough trauma. Doug Lemoff refers to students' answers as data, and what we've tended to do over the last 10 years is depersonalize these human beings and just see them as numbers. And I find it really fairly repulsive, really. Yes, you have to assess students, but it also causes teachers to be, teachers have always been overworked. The constant demand for data means that teachers are basically not able to do their job at all.
No, I agree, and again, it's something which I've seen firsthand. You look at the teacher; they got their own form registration group. Then they're teaching, several classes. Then they might be teaching across, several different subject areas. Then they have their break time duty. Then they have their departmental. Then they've got their one-to-one. Then they've got scrutiny. Then they've got data upload. Then they've got, their professional learning at the end of the week. Then they've got their one-to-one performance management with the head teacher and senior leadership. And then they've got parents' evening. And then they just continue to add on to their continuous commitments as a teacher. And I was looking through a duty roster before I left my last school, and it was like, right, you have to be on the corridor on lesson changeover at this time, then you have to be on toilet duty at this time, then you have to be on break duty, then you got after school bus duty. I was like, it's impossible for a teacher to remember every little detail of every day, because they added so much. Even just, right, when there's lesson changeover, you have to be stood here at this time. It's like, when do you give the time for a teacher to allow their class to arrive in their class and to be there ready, rather than, right, having to move from one piece of the corridor over then back to their classroom just because they have to be on duty there. Just, there can be teachers just outside their classroom reminding teachers as they go through. It doesn't have to be a military operation for every lesson changeover every day.
Well, is it any wonder we have teacher recruitment crisis? Because what happens is people burn out. Yeah, people do it for, and I've worked with some younger teachers recently, and certainly one of them was definitely considering leaving the profession. The workload that young teachers are under is absolutely ridiculous, and of course, because of the recruitment crisis, that just increases the workload, which is like, it's a kind of vicious circle, really. I worry for young teachers. They have little autonomy. They're given learning materials which don't induce a great deal of learning, and they're under constant pressure. I think the British education system is in a very, very, very bad way.
No, I agree entirely. And again, so it's from someone myself where, I'm going off to do a PGC. A lot of people have said to me, "Oh, you're leaving education to do that. Do you really want to do that?" I'm like, yeah, of course. Like, I still want to be a teacher. And yes, there is bureaucracy, which I don't agree with. And I find that, very, very challenging. And there's a lot where I think it could be cut out of education because, again, there's too much in there, as we just spoke about there. And I've seen teachers, we had one last year. He was on an open university course. And then within, I believe, a month, he said, "That's it, I've had enough." And he was a month into that. And I think that was a very sad time for him, because you could just see the optimism of the teacher on his first day in teacher training, to then it being depleted within the month period and him looking like a complete different guy, because the motivation being sucked out of him, the pressure obviously got to him, he felt exhausted, and that was a month in. And when you look at teachers for a sustained amount of time, for example, your 30 years, which is an incredible amount of time, there might not be a case where we see teachers in the profession for that period of time. They might have 10 years, 15 years, where's my exit plan? And I think it comes down to it is going to be a very different trend in what I think we see teachers become, where they aspire to get into senior leadership so they can have the management, they can look at the strategy, they can look at all these things, where it gets them away from teaching, gets them not on hands-on in the classroom on behavior management, but they're still managing this. They're still managing this from a strategic point of view and being hands-on to support their staff and all these things. But then they try to look for executive roles. They try to go on the boards and things like that. So then they've sort of got their exit strategy from trying to elevate themselves from teaching. And you can kind of understand that. But then I think the trend over time is going to certainly change.
Well, it's not helped by the fact that the skills of teaching are immensely transferable. As an anecdote, and this is a while ago now, my girlfriend at university, and for 10 years subsequent, was a trained maths teacher, and a very, very, very capable woman, very talented. And she never entered the profession. And the reason she never entered the profession was that we both moved down to London together, and she walked into various, she wasn't hurt by the fact that she was exquisitely beautiful and lovely as well. She walked into various media interviews and got every single job. Our skills are enormously transferable.
And I agree.
yeah, it may be that those people that enter the profession for 3 years, thank you for your service, but they'll go on to do, and many people do go on to do really, really high profile things.
Absolutely, and I think it's great because they can go on to do those great things. For example, a head of technology, been in teaching for 15 years, and I think he had a 5-year plan to take early retirement and just get into something else. But he, within a year of having that conversation, he was like, I've just got to get out now, I've had enough. And he went on to do project management, and that's great for him because being from a technological point of view and background, and there's a lot which you can use from teaching because you, as a head department, you're managing your staff and your subject area, and there's a lot which you can take into project management. And he said he's thriving off it now and he's enjoying it, and he's got a bit more freedom where he's not stuck in on that routine hour to hour, then your duties, etc., etc. And I think that is very transferable. And then when we're talking about transferable skills, and sometimes you see, I've gone into schools where some of the senior leaders, they've only ever been in that school since they become an NQT. And then where I've been in other schools and they're in senior leadership, and for those who have been there since they've been an NQT, they're stuck in ways and they don't know new ways of doing things because they've only ever known what was produced in that school, and they've never explored other systematic ways of doing things, or never worked with different senior leaders, and therefore some of their ideas are perhaps lagging behind where some of the other schools are because they haven't gone out and had that experience. So when it comes down to that, and you see those leaders over that period of time progress all the way through, and they're up in that senior leadership stage. Now, there is that argument where, again, those from outside education will say, well, actually, surely you could just go into senior leadership and never having taught, right? And you can go in and look at the management practices, look at the culture, look at strategy, budgeting, and support from that point of view. Do you think there is an opportunity from a teaching point of view? And again, this is something which, exploring education as a wider perspective and looking at strategy, whether there would be opportunities in the senior leadership where you could have people from other professions come in and transfer those skills where they haven't been teachers. So, for example, they might have been a director somewhere else, and then they might come in and be an assistant head teacher in charge of staffing, for example.
Well, I believe, I don't know if this organisation still exists, but there was an organisation called Teaching Leaders, which sought to kind of fast track ambitious people who had previously, who had interesting experiences in industry. And I think, yes, they had to qualify as teachers and possibly do a couple of years, but they were certainly fast tracked because of their experiences outside of education. That's all I've got to say on that, really. There is, however, there's two kinds of people within education, I think. There are those that are focused on the kids and their art form, and then there are those that are focused on self-advancement. Now, they're not mutually exclusive, of course, but what happens is, like, you have situations, and they're quite problematic situations, where somebody of my experience level and former abilities, who's written 13 books on the subject, would sit in school halls and be lectured at on how to teach by somebody that perhaps had been doing it 2 or 3 years. And it caused me the profoundly uncomfortable experience of being lectured on how to do something that I'm an expert in, by a person who had read 13 times less books about it than I'd written. And I think this balance between the teacher focused on the role of being a teacher, and I'm not saying all CPD managers are careerists. Yeah, there's some very, very impassioned people, and those people that are driven personally by kind of status and driven by power. It's a problematic little brew, that, really, in that those two kinds of people. What's problematic about it is that the people focused on the teaching are the experts at teaching, whereas the people focused on their own self-advancement are not experts at teaching. And consequently, what you have is the people focused on self-advancement telling the experts how to do something they're expert in, and it doesn't work.
And that's exactly what I was alluding to. And again, it's it's where you've got those expert teachers where they know their subject inside out, and when you know it as well when you go into a subject, or as a student, as someone who's observing, as someone who might be support staff, and you already know that member of staff is experienced and detailed enough and an expert in their subject area, where you're going to be fascinated by what they're able to convey across and what they bring and the kind of questions which they answer and the way that they talk about it just with such passion, despite being in education for so long. But that's the kind of teacher where I really enjoy that, and having sat in through that as a student as well, and at university level, and we get lecturers who have been involved in education themselves 30 years, and you're just having such great discussions with them, and they're just so engaged in their subject. Whereas yes, okay, they might be in some senior positions, but their subject still matters the most to them. Their senior positions come secondary to them because they want to be in the classroom, they want to be teaching, they want to really support the students, and that is what I find fascinating. Whereas when you get senior leaders then who are still teaching, and then they're not really focused on teaching because they're too busy trying to focus on all the other things, and perhaps teaching isn't where they want to look at, it is really interesting. And I find it fascinating in terms of observing people, observing senior leadership, looking at the kind of teacher that I want to be, looking at how I'm going to learn from others, and certainly trying to identify schools that I would like to work in once I complete my qualification, right? And that's the important thing, is about finding supportive leadership and from someone from your experience, and looking at successful practice, and now being a trainer and working with an array of different people. What does good leadership look like from your perspective, and what has been successful practice?
I can only talk about the leaders that I've really enjoyed working for, and I'll use their real first names. Right, so I'll go through head teachers. First one, a bully, deeply unempathetic, ruled by fear. That didn't work for me. The second one, a lender, just a wonderful human being, quite political, utterly passionate about the children, a very, very hard-working lady, hardest working person in the school. But she did this marvellous thing where if ever she caught you doing any good, she'd just leave a note on your pigeon hole. Just leave. I thought that was fantastic. And the buy-in that got from the staff was incredible. Another wonderful head teacher, and people are wonderful for different reasons, is Jonathan. Jonathan, quiet, undemonstrative, gentle, and kind. So I think ultimately it's the human spirit that makes a decent leader. Alina, again, very, very committed to her school, very committed to the community. But what Alina did was she created a happy environment. She took it very, very slow, and recruited people, over a period of years that she knew were going to work within the environment. And there's a lot of laughter in that school. So, ultimately, I think as graduate professionals, we don't really need to be bullied. If you can't take teaching a group of kids on a council estate seriously, then you need lessons in what's serious. And so consequently, and yes, there are some, I can't imagine how you could be a lazy teacher now, but some teachers are better than others. But leadership for me is kindness.
I like the way you talk about that, and I'm with you there. Leadership is about calmness, and I think that's one of the great things which I took away from any leader is, are they calm and collected? Can we have an open conversation rather than someone who's 100 miles an hour? They don't have that time to see you. They want to book in, if you want to have just a quick catch up with them, and not all their decisions are affected because they're not calm about how they go about doing it, and perhaps overthink some of the details which don't need to be overthought when it's just a straightforward decision. And for you then, when it comes back to those behavior strategies and being first hand in the classroom, is that how you saw dealing with behavior from a behavior strategy, was just calmness and approaching that student in a particular way, or was your behavior strategy slightly different?
Well, yeah, my abilities managing behaviour developed over 30 years, but not that you'd know it at my last year. Behaviour management is a set of complex interlocking skills. Yes, there needs to be systems for when it fails, but ultimately it is about remaining calm. Ultimately, that's it. Yeah. So I had got a number of challenging classes in my last school. For some reason, they gave me a Key Stage 3 class, which I never gave me a couple of Key Stage 3 classes. And they're a very challenging class. And one of the young malnourished men in that class noted something. So there were some very serious behavioural problems. And this young man said, have you noticed that the noisier that we are, yeah, the more out of order we are, the calmer he gets. And I think if there is a secret, it's that you learn how to project calm. Because so for instance, saying calm down, calm down, calm down, calm down, that doesn't make anybody calm down. However, by projecting calm yourself, and there's a hell of a lot of it is body language. Yeah, so in a classroom, there's this ballet underneath what we say and what we do, and the ballet is body language and it's positioning, and there are certain rules of that. In truth, I think many teachers don't really understand that. Like for me, your positioning, your body language, your use of your voice are utterly pivotal to your ability to inspire and keep control of the class. It's not just routines and consistency. To say it's just routines and consistency is to reveal that you don't know anything about it.
And again, that's something which I've used and something which I found firsthand when, I got a student raging at me. They perhaps didn't have a great lesson, and then they've come into the behaviour centre where I was based, and then they're very much irate. They're up there, and all I have to do is remember, well, they didn't have that issue with me. Their issues from the last lesson. I'm going to give them a couple of minutes just for them to rage at me, and that's okay. And then I go, finished? And then they go, yeah. I go, was there a reason that you shouted at me because I didn't do that? And they're like, no, so I was just very upset. And then we just have a very good conversation from there. And that's all it took, was just for me just to sit back, listen to them, let them project their irrational, rage at that moment, and then just go, right, actually, what is the real issue of why you're so upset or why you're so angry in this point? What really happened? And we go on and explore that, and then we look at that in different ways. And that is some of the work which I really enjoy. And when, again, it's not me going, right, you were shouting at me, right, I'm going to shout straight back at you, or right, you calm down now, or right, I want you to go back outside my classroom and knock the door, and then you come in, and then we sit down, and then we talk. It's actually, okay, how can I deal with that? And again, being in a behaviour centre is very dynamic. There's lots of different students, lots of different needs. And again, it's how I look at those bases of students. And I think, right, actually, when I transfer into being a teacher and I've got these series of students, and I might have one very bouncy class, let's say, and there's going to be multiple, students in there with different backgrounds, different types of behaviours. How will I manage, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of them on a class of 25 around that, and looking at that collectively whilst trying to teach? And I think that's the one thing what you can work out as a teacher from the start. If you can learn how to do that and adapt and engage these students in different ways while having your behavior management, while having those relationships, then that's what will lead you to be a successful teacher. And first and foremost, build that relationship whilst getting that teaching right from the start, and then those students will be on side with you. And even if they disengage by year 9 and they don't choose your subject, again, you still have a relationship with them where you can support them in and around the school, support them around their environment, look at what that culture is around that.
Yeah, I think that's a useful phrase. Don't give anger a mirror to feed on itself. And there's another technique, and you are right to just park the irate student, but there is another technique when they've calmed down, which is quite useful. Just do something practical with them. Yeah? So just to tidy up the classroom, something, tidy up the books, just ask for their help. There's also, it's well worth knowing that adrenaline, I think, takes about 45 minutes to subside, and you remain in a hair trigger state all that time. So one of the things that we do that is really stupid, if 2 boys have had a fight, we'll separate them out and then ask them to shake hands, and it of course flares up again. Do we have a question?
No, I think that was just the important thing there, is looking at you know, how you work with those different types of students, and again, just elaborating on that behavior strategy. But I think that's the important thing, is that adrenaline takes 45 minutes to subside, and then there's also again, where you distract them almost, because as soon as you said that, there was a student which I thought of straight away. He struggles to regulate his emotions. So one of the first things I used to do was, here's a puzzle. Yeah, and he would just sit down and just crack on with a puzzle. 20 minutes later, then he's like, all right, sir. And I'm like, yeah, you okay now? He's like, yeah. And sometimes then it's that I had a colleague which I shared the room with, and he was like, this room isn't for puzzles, this room is for behavior and sanctions. And again, it's looking at, right, what is consistency to him, what is consistency to me, what is consistency to that student, but actually, am I prioritizing the support for that student as a behavior center, so then they can come in and then I can re-engage them in that learning? Because if I just try and get them to sit down and go, right, there's your work straight away, they're not going to be engaged in that. So sometimes that was hard to find that medium balance between me and another member of staff, and looking at the pupil first. And again, you can be conflicted. And I suppose you've seen it as a teacher over those years, in between seeing what is right in your views and your values, and being conflicted in terms of culture, school strategy, behavior management, senior leadership, and again, all the bureaucracy which comes around that. But you know, we prioritize what we feel from our expertise, and again, we see teachers over time prioritize that based on experience and their expertise as well.
Is there a question in there?
just having a great conversation with you there, Phil. And
let's go back to the puzzle. Yeah, I wouldn't have an issue with that at all. If it works, it works. For instance, for a period of my career, I bought loads of Lego and I just tipped it out in the corner, and occasionally, because yeah, you're being naughty, go and play with Lego. You know, come back when you made me something cool. So there's nothing wrong with the distraction task. Yes. Anxiety feeds on itself, anger feeds on itself. Like redirection, which is exactly what you've just done, is a perfectly decent technique. Yeah, don't look at that, look at this. Look at this over there. Come on, look at this over there. Yeah, it's perfectly valid. It's backed up by research. So I approve of your jigsaw puzzle.
I'm glad I've got your approval. That means a lot, Phil. But it led to me looking at one of the questions which I put on there, and from something which I read about one of your posts the other day, which was anti-theatical value systems, which was mutually incompatible, and that sort of led to something which I was talking about in terms of uniform earlier on, and you know, around what you posted in terms of, you know, touching upon your post where you elaborated on uniform, how that looked in concurrent practice. And for you, when you look at those systems and that, you know, that mutual incompatibility, how do we get around that altogether? Is that going to be based on a systematic review holistically from a government point of view, or is that going to be based upon each individual environment per school and their leadership and culture behind that?
And that article was specifically about white working class kids, and how the value system of the white working class family and the value system of the middle class environment don't match up at all, right? And I've been writing and reading about the white working class's refusal to engage with education for probably 20 years. And that article is just an article from a book which it doesn't look as if anybody wants to publish. And sadly, in that book, which is What's to Be Done About the White Working Class, the conclusions are that there's not a lot, that we have an almost perfect storm in that everything that's good about white working class culture, and there's a lot that's good about it, actively mitigates against their involvement in school. And ultimately the conclusion, and this comes from Gillian Evans' brilliant book, Educational Failure in the White Working Class, is that what we do with ethnic children, we give them a culture, we respect the culture, but we deny them the social class. Whereas white working class kids, we give them social class, but we don't acknowledge that they actually have a culture. And the intention of the book, before my career all went tits up, the intention of the book was to educate middle and maybe even working class educators as to what the good things in white working class culture are, and how we should, one, accept that they do have a culture, and two, pay explicit respect to it, because we've never ever, like, so multi-ethnic celebrations do omit to celebrate white working class culture. So it's a specific passion of mine, given that I come from that environment. So the idea of the value system of the school and the value system of home not matching up. Well, how about we find out a little bit more about the value system of home?
Yeah.
And, so, for instance, I had about 5-6 years ago, I took over a very chaotic class at Christmas, and was given the instruction: get as many of them through as you can. And there were 2 naughty boys in the class. One of them, I nearly said his real name now, I can't. Let's call him Francis. One of them is kind of, he was from a kind of well-known local family. He was always going to fail. He was disruptive. And his mate, whose name wasn't James, was very different. He was extraordinarily well-clad, handsome young man, spoke beautifully. His dad was a carpenter. And he was, to use a working class phrase, absolutely bone idle. He wouldn't do a single piece of work. I couldn't make him do it. Like, he'd write a sentence and then feel he had exhausted his wit. And I tried my range of strategies, nothing like, and basically wasn't interested in education. The only point, and it was too late, where I got through to him was by telling him, look, I respect who you are, I respect what your dad does for a living, I respect your family. And he kind of perked up a little bit. And, these are the reasons you might want to engage. But of course, by then, this child had been allowed to fail for 11 years in education. By then, it was vastly too late. It was 3 weeks before the exams. So my contention is that we need to reach out to white working class families, and we need to show them that we respect that they have a culture, and we respect that culture and what's good about that. So
it was a fascinating read, and just even on the insight from your LinkedIn post, that was a great sort of takeaway, and really led to me wanting to read more into that, and it's on my reading list, hopefully before I go back to university next week, because the reading list I have is huge right now. But I think
what's on it?
There's a series of things. Right now I'm reading Visible Learning for Teaching by
all right, that's total rubbish. It is worth researching. Visible Learning. Write this down. Have you got a pen?
Yeah, absolutely.
Go on to Twitter and search for Stephen, P-H-E-N, Vainker, V-A-I-N-K-E-R.
Yeah.
And see what he's got to say about John Hattie.
Fab. Yeah. Thank you very much.
That book is academically deeply unsound and contains countless plagiarisms.
And it's one of those where
shouldn't be on university courses.
It's one of those where I've been reading through it, I've been looking at notes and whatever, and I constantly highlighted, like, this is the author's view, this is the author's view, because as I'm reading it, I must remember that is their view and not something which is, black and white, or something which is 100% for, gold and gospel. This is their view, right? And that's one of the most important things which I've had to really take away from that, and remember that that's what it's come down to, is how I'm looking at that and remembering not to get drawn into that every time,
Well, the book is academically unsound. It shouldn't be on teacher training courses. And also, you will have noticed, it's really fucking boring. It's unbelievably difficult to read. For me, Visible Learning is a vast financial exercise based on academic fraudulence. Right, next.
Next book, Learning to Teach in Secondary School by Capel, Leask and Turner.
I'm sure that's fine.
Research Methods in Education by Cohen, Mannion and Morrison.
Don't know that.
Dymoke and Harrison, Reflective Teaching and Learning in Secondary School.
Yeah, these are all kind of PGCE books that no teacher ever reads after PGCE.
Effective Teaching in Schools, Theory and Practice by Kiriakou.
That has a good reputation.
Okay, I'll highlight that one as something that is gone down well. And then the last one on my reading list is Effective Teaching, Evidence and Practice by Mugis and Reynolds.
Yeah, they're all just PGCE books that you will never ever open again after your PGCE.
I've sort of gathered that so far in terms of just the first book, which I've slowly read through, which is Visible Learning, mate, to be fair, Phil.
Are you managing to unpick any of it? Because I found it incomprehensible.
No, there was literally just that's come through from the university. We're like, this is your reading list. Try and touch upon this before you start your course. So, you know, I will see a little bit more when we get into it on Monday. But yeah, that was just a list of things that were sent over to me. But Phil, we're almost at the end now, and there was one great area that I really wanted to explore further with you before we went, and that was your work as advisor to Gareth Southgate, where you talked about unlearning behaviour. And then
yeah, I'm not allowed to talk about that. I'll talk about football, but I'm not allowed to actually talk
that's
about.
Fine, mate. I'll make a note of that. 51 min.
If I have anything with the FA, which of course I might not.
That's fine. I'll make a little note. I'll cut that little snippet out there, mate. Sorry about that.
No, keep it in. It's quite funny. So the work within professional football, years, over a decade ago now, I did a series of speeches for Football League Education, and then they went down well, and then they asked me to do a speech to every single academy coach in the whole of the Football League. So I had to do 3 distinct gigs, and in order to research that, I went into 3 football clubs, Fulham, Charlton and Brentford, and the then manager of the then Brentford Academy took me to the side, and they adopted me very briefly, in that they wanted a teacher's view on certain things, and I gave them a fairly pointed view on the standard of some of the lessons that the academy kids were getting. And we started work on a project to make academy coaching evidence-based, to use what we know about learning to inform the coaching sessions. Sadly, and fascinatingly, the director of the academy at the point said, look, we do things differently. We're not really interested in football people, which I thought was fascinating. We're interested in getting expert opinions from other areas. And we started this project, brought in somebody from the FA, and because they do things differently, about 3 months later they cancelled the academy. So they closed the academy. But it started off a run in professional football. I've worked for Manchester United, Brentford, Manchester City, and I have worked regularly for an elite level client that I am not allowed to talk about.
That's not an issue whatsoever, but it's fascinating that you got to work with those different clubs, and when they spoke about that person-led approach and not the football itself. And again, there's been discussions around the different types of academies and the categories and how that works, and the elite player performance program that is in place, and the tracking and monitoring of when it comes down to it. And when it comes to, being an educator and supporting those young people, and again, looking at the performance environment and perhaps being in those elite stages and academies and stuff, when you see the array of talent which is just being lost because perhaps they haven't been in favor with the current coaching team and things like that, right? What are your thoughts on losing so much talent? And is there a way to harness that talent without losing it altogether?
I don't know. I'm aware that the game has got an issue, and I'm aware that the game knows that the game has got an issue. I'm aware that being released from academies has resulted in suicides. The game's very, very much aware that it's got a terrible issue there. And the thing I did learn, which I found fascinating and heartbreaking, is that every year the club was only ever interested in 2 or 3 players. Yeah. The rest of them were always there to make up the numbers, because you can't play football with 2 or 3 players. I'm aware, like, for instance, Nick at Manchester United, the head of Manchester United's academy, is one of the nicest human beings I've ever met. He's deeply empathetic. And there's some wonderful people working in football clubs and wonderful people working with academies. But I think it's a kind of insoluble problem, really. Yeah, so I know, like, if you're at Arsenal or Chelsea or Liverpool or Man United or Man City, if you get released, then you can possibly drop down. But if you're in the Scunthorpe Academy, then you're probably not going to play pro football.
Yeah,
it is a issue.
Absolutely, and being a Chelsea fan myself, right, and seeing the amount of talent which we harness and the amount of players which we have. So, you know, there's been a couple of good players which are now first team players at clubs like Everton and Arsenal and so on. And I thought they were such good players. Like, they should have had more game time at Chelsea. And the most unfortunate thing was that we hadn't utilised their talent. However, the one thing I'm pleased is that we've sold them so they can have a good career and not just be sat around on loan for 8 or 9 years like one player we had years ago, and his career festered to be nothing. Because yes, it's great that we've had all this talent, and okay, from a performance point of view, the club have upgraded on that type of talent, but then these are still good players, and I'm so glad we're not just wasting their talent and they've moved on to somewhere else, despite whether it be a rival or not.
Well, what you need to know as well is that they're financial assets. Yeah. So if you're a player who's been through the Chelsea Academy, then that player is a financial asset.
Yeah.
Yeah. Recently, I think Chelsea signed a young man from Palace, and he's never going to play for the first team. But what they'll do is they'll put him out on loan, and eventually, his value will appreciate. So, these football players are financial assets. A team is. A club as well run financially as Chelsea is.
And that can be the hard thing from someone like educators like us who might end up in the world of football and then looking at performance and then going, all right, what's the people value and how do we look at their learning and all that, to then looking at financial assets. Sometimes then we can find that conflict in our inner selves, and where we might then make that decision whether it's we want to continue to be that educator or whether we want to continue into a performance environment but try and contribute to a culture in some way, but also know that it's come down to financial and performance. And perhaps that's some of the elements which we're seeing in education creep in, and something which we spoke about at the start. But there's been so much which we've been able to talk about, Phil, and I've been really looking forward to having this discussion with you, not only for the podcast itself, but just so I could sit back and be able to take so many notes away, which I have from you, from your extensive experience in education, and get your different views. And I think that's the most important thing for me, is trying to educate myself as much as possible before I go into teaching, and continue to do that and not be stuck in one way and be stuck systematic and be the way that they told you to be. I like unconventional ways. I don't like to form in line as much. I like to stick out a little bit, and that might bite someone in the ass, but I'm all about not just conforming to the system all the time.
Well, good luck. Yeah, but just a final question from me. What are you going to do if you find yourself in a high control environment where you're micromanaged all day, every day, and you have no autonomy whatsoever, and you have to teach the way that everybody else does?
Then I'll be looking for another school as quickly as possible, because that's the one thing that I really don't want, is to be micromanaged and not have the autonomy. I want to be able to have lessons with students where they come in and they have that unexpected or that enjoyment and that connection with them, and not being told I have to use this PowerPoint or I have to use, this series of teaching because the teacher next door is teaching it, and that's what my head of department wants. I want a head of department which goes, okay, this is your subject area. You got free will to do this as long as you meet, the criteria based upon performance, for example.
Well, good luck. Yeah, if you find a decent school, then it is, as people have said, the best job in the world. Wish you luck.
I thank you very much, Phil, and honestly, your time today has been nothing but appreciated, and I hope that you take care, and it's been great to meet you and have this connection with you.
Okay, nice to meet you too, Luca.